Hello again, friends, and you are my friends, and welcome to another edition of 605, the Superpodcast, the only podcast on Turner time. As always, my co-host is here, the esteemed Nimrod, David Bixenspan.
Yes, I'm here, and we'll tell that story to Jim off the air because we don't want to get him going.
Well, also with us today, we have asked a friend of ours to come on board and discuss classic wrestling with us. He is a tape trader, a former photographer, magazine writer. Ladies and gentlemen, James from Kentucky.
And that was the greatest. That was the greatest couple of first words ever spoken on a podcast. Hello, friends, and you are my friends. And I've been a friend of yours. You've lived in my neighborhood, Mr. Rogers, for what, 20 years? I knew you when you were underage, Brian Last.
I met you when I was 14. That's right.
Yes. And right after fucking Vince Russo and Skull Von Baldhead had been the entertainment at your bar mitzvah, and then you meet me in Tennessee when you're the next year when you're 14, and your whole life's been fucked up.
I know. Pretty much. You know, I introduced you as James from Kentucky. Do you know anything about, there used to be a caller on the old Wrestling Observer IATA show, one of the very few callers that Dave Meltzer banned from the show, named James from Kentucky.
I have not heard of this.
It's pretty funny. This guy just started calling one day. I think his first call, Billy Graham was on the air, and he calls up, very mild-mannered, and it's funny the things that upset Dave Meltzer, because he goes, "Hey, Dave, I got a nickname for you, Dynamite Dave." And that was enough to infuriate Dave Meltzer.
But and also, he sounds like the old child molester on Family Guy. Well, can he sound like that? Mr. What's his name? Mr. Fuck, I don't know. Mr. Blow Me.
Well, he made a few calls, and his last call ever was, he had Nick Bockwinkel on the air, Dave. And the guy calls up, and he asks a question, and he goes, "Nick, can you say hello to John at home? He's my friend." And Nick says, "John, hello." And Dave immediately cuts, and he goes, we're going to commercial. We're getting all new callers.
Now,
end of the famed James from Kentucky.
No, but do you know about his last call to IATA, which was not to Wrestling Observer Live?
Yes, he called one of the Russian Malloy show, I believe.
Which was, I thought it was a gossip show, but I guess they did an advice segment. And James from Kentucky called.
Who is this now? What were their names?
Russian Malloy.
They were the gossip columnists for the New York Daily News.
That's
right. Okay.
And I think this might even be on YouTube. James from Kentucky calls very sad, and then producer Al gets on the air to explain why he was banned. And James from Kentucky's like, "Well, you know, that nickname I gave to Dave, Dynamite Dave, I trademarked it. So he can't use it anymore."
That's right.
Now, the other caller that was banned was Alex from Puerto Rico, who was a guy in Puerto Rico who did not have an internet connection, that was given the call-in number by a friend. It would just call it in because he was told he could call and talk wrestling. And I believe he even would regularly call from a payphone.
That's right.
From Puerto Rico.
Yes.
Well, at least you got to admire his dedication.
Yes.
Well,
I'm glad I'm not having to call from a payphone in Puerto Rico on your program here today on 605. I understand that you have jumping off points, and you just wherever the conversation takes you. And I'm very good at obfuscating the facts and burying the issue and taking off on tangents. So there'll probably be no linear thought whatsoever to this program, which apparently, from the description I've heard, is what you're going for.
Pretty much.
Exactly. Well, before we get too far into jumping off, I do want to say that Jim has recently written a book, as I'm sure everyone has heard already, along with Mark James, called Tuesday Night at the Gardens, The History of Pro Wrestling in Louisville. It is the most complete analysis of the golden age of Louisville wrestling from 1970 to 75, also covering the overall history of Louisville wrestling. It is available at jimcornette.com. Jim, tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, and thank you very much for that plug, especially since Bix got his. Actually, Bix got his off Amazon because I didn't have Bix's address. And then Bix, I've sent you the companion DVD because you can't get the DVD off Amazon. And Brian, I didn't know you had a podcast till last week, and I didn't send you a review copy because also you just moved, and I can't find the email, I don't think, with where your new address and blah, blah, blah. So thank you for plugging it anyway, even though you haven't read it. But it's a labor of love, Tuesday Night at the Gardens, pro wrestling in Louisville, and it starts at the turn of the last century, the early 1900s, when the Louisville Gardens, or as it was known then, the Jefferson County Armory, which in 1906 was the largest building in the state of Kentucky, opened and since become a historic landmark. But Strangler Lewis wrestled there, and Londos and Shikat and all the great names of the teens and 20s. The first time Strangler Lewis it was ever announced as Strangler Lewis was in the ring at the Buckingham Theater here in downtown Louisville.
Wow.
That's where he assumed the name. And so it's a history of Louisville wrestling from the roaring 20s and teens through the World War II years, the first tag team matches, great promotional incidents and big gates and crowds through the 50s, first network TV boom. And then from the time that the great Midwest territory of Jim Barnett, Barnett moved to Australia in 1964, and Louisville pretty much died off. And it was dark for 5 years, and then Jerry Jarrett came in and revived it and started the modern era of Louisville wrestling. And it takes you through that period. So really from the debut of Strangler Lewis to the rise of Jerry Lawler. And it's a cool book, and it starts out before I started my days as a wrestling fan, obviously, when Jerry Jarrett first opened Louisville here in 1970. But then when I started watching TV and started getting involved, and it goes to my firsthand notes when I went to the matches when I was a kid there at the Gardens. So it's a great book. It's got tons of illustrations. Some stuff hadn't been seen in 50 years in print or in public. And it's available, as everything is that I do, at jimcornette.com. It's just there's a plethora of me at jimcornette.com. You can click on my link and go to my weekly podcast, The Jim Cornette Experience. You can click on collectibles and get all the merchandise and the books. You can click on my Fighting Spirit magazine columns or my commentaries, my bio. You can even look at wonderful pictures of me back when I was a young, attractive-looking man. Back when I first knew you as a teenager, Brian.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's been an interesting year for wrestling books. The Bob Backlund book finally came out. It was delayed several times, and from all accounts, and I've read a little bit of it, it's a tremendous book, one of the most honest wrestling books ever produced. Bill Apter's book came out. It's kind of a light read. There's the Capital Rising book, the history of Vince McMahon Sr.'s wrestling company.
And actually, you got to tell me where I can find Capital Rising, because I've been trying to, I don't know how to get that book, but I tried to get Bill Apter's, but he didn't have any copies at a show he was doing. I said, Bill, I gave you one of my books. Give me one of your books. He said, well, all the books belong to the other guy that brought me here. I'm like, fuck.
I go to Amazon. I go to Amazon.com usually. That's how
do they have it? Well, see, I used to go to bookstores and now I go to the Fan Fest. If they don't have things at the Fan Fest, sometimes I don't get them. I'm going to write that down. Maybe the Queen can order me that for my Christmas present.
Yeah, that sounds good. Obviously, tell Stacy I say hello. But I do want to say there's 3 interesting new books that just came out. I'm fascinated with. 2 of them I will be getting. One of them, well, at least one of them I definitely will be getting. One of them I'm thinking about getting. One of them there's no way I'm getting. The one I'm definitely going to get is, I just found out Scott Teal put out a new edition of Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George with expanded chapters, new photos, and an interview with the original author. And I'm fascinated to get that.
I had just heard about that not too long ago, and I'm looking forward to that too. And I wonder if they will do, because, my book dispels the myth. There was no Mildred Burke, Elvira Snodgrass match in Louisville in 1941 that drew 18,000 people, and that myth was started by the original publication of Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George.
Tell us a little bit about that book, because you had a copy of it, when it first came out, or shortly after it came out? No, I bought it when it first came. Yes, my mom drove me to the bookstore like God intended us to purchase books back in those days. And I plunked down my $3.95 or whatever for the hard cover with the dust jacket, and I read that thing from cover to cover and studied the big gates and crowd histories and all of the title lineages and the stories and everything. And it was because that was literally the only behind the scenes, inside, non-kayfabe pro wrestling book, even though it was about pro wrestling from literally 20 years before that. Pro wrestling book that you could possibly get. It was the only inside information. And so that still occupies a place of honor on my shelf in the vault. But
I did disprove his Mildred Burke and Elvira Snod. They had 3 matches that year, and in total they drew about 18,000 people. But we've narrowed that down. It's a hole in his factual fact checking.
It's one of those books I'd always heard about and never been able to actually get a copy of. So I'm actually really looking forward to getting it and reading it, and especially the interview with the author. I'd like to hear what he has to say. And
I think the new, with 40 years, retrospective to look back on it since it was published, I think the new material might be even more interesting than the old stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think. And the other 2 interesting new books that have come out that I'm really one of them I'm thinking about. One of them I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get. One of them is I saw on Amazon. Fred Curry has written a book about his father, Wild Bull Curry.
Oh my God!
Which, if it's at all honest and filled with honest stories, could be really good. And the other one you mentioned, Strangler Lewis, and I really want the book, but I know I'm not going to get it. Is that Steve Yohe, the wrestling historian?
Yes,
I was put out a Strangler Lewis book.
Talking to Meltzer about this. Yeah, tell the people.
Well, it's $100.
Well, for the hardcover, it's $100. For the soft cover, it's what, $40?
Maybe.
Is there a soft cover? Because I want to find I might even pay $100, but I'd like to find obviously a little bit cheaper copy.
Or maybe it was more than $40, but there is a soft cover from the publisher. I think the Amazon only has the hardcover.
That's what it was. Well, who's the damn publisher? How do we get this book?
It's some I don't know. We didn't go over this before we started.
We keep hearing about this great book, and when none of us have, they must have done a great job of writing and a poor job of advertising, because we're hearing this is a great book and we don't have dick all clue how to get it.
Well, it's a little weird because they printed it through Amazon anyway, but the soft cover isn't on Amazon. Yeah, I don't know.
All right, here we go.
So whatever.
See, I'm jotting down my wish list. I may try to find some rich old woman to be a sugar mama for me and get this for me for Christmas or something. This $100 book.
Having a rich old woman buy you things was your whole gimmick for years.
Very good point. It was a different relationship, but I see where you're going with that.
Well, the one type of year that Brian's like, I didn't remember until I watched on WWE Network like last week or the week before that when Mid-South started to become UWF, that Eddie Gilbert's gimmick was that he was like a kept man for a rich older woman.
I just remembered that since you brought it up. I saw some of that at the time, but I did not, it wasn't like it was on top of my mind.
I know. The best
jump off in different directions.
Yeah, I know. The best part is Bill Watts saying, and we might actually have talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember. I know I tweeted about it, that he says, I may just be an old-fashioned chauvinist, but back in my day, we had a word for a man that lived off a woman, and it was a 4-letter word that began with a B. And I'm just, 4 letters that begins with a B?
What?
Yeah.
What's that word? I'm trying to fucking figure. I'm not getting the fucking Vanna White needs to turn some more fucking letters for me.
I think he just messed it up.
You think he meant a 5-letter word?
Yes.
That began with a B?
Yeah.
But that a man that lives off of, now exactly which way was he?
So I think he was saying bitch.
But yeah, it don't really work, does it?
No, I mean.
Well, in other news,
last week on the show, I accidentally called Bix bitch because I got mixed up when I was saying his name. But
bitch and span.
Yeah. Like I've never gotten that one before.
Bix has a cousin named Akeem. We learned last week on the program.
A distant cousin that I've never met. Yeah.
Akeem Bixenspan.
I don't think he's a Bixenspan.
Just embrace it already. He's a Bixenspan. Okay. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, something I really don't ever hear, you've done so many shoot interviews. I mean, in many ways, you revolutionized shoot interviews, Fan Week in 93.
I was the first one that actually told the truth in it.
Yeah. It's really interesting because Bix this week on another one of his shows, one of my favorite podcasts, Between the Sheets with him and Chris Zellner, they had Pete Letterberg on.
Now, wait a minute. Between the Sheets with you is...
We go over a week in history via the different newsletters.
Okay, so you don't actually get in bed and be between...
The name was Chris's idea.
Okay, all right.
The original idea was Under the Covers with Bix and Chris.
I thought you were getting naked and getting in the bed with the... Go ahead.
But this week they had Pete Letterberg on, and it was a really good episode.
Pete, yes.
And they talked a little bit about the WFIA conventions back in the day, and it got me thinking, because he mentioned, the one I went to, maybe it was Knoxville, I'm not sure. He said, I met Jim Cornette there, I met Eddie Gilbert there, became friends with them. And I got to thinking with shoot interviews, you did yours, the first one that you did was 93, and then of course I was there in 94, 95 at Fan Week, and then Eddie Gilbert did one with Bob Barnett in 94. It's interesting that the two guys who started around the same time as fans, even though his father was in the business, but started as fans, working, with what were the newsletters back then, were the first two guys to embrace shoot interviews and telling the truth to fans.
Well, now with an asterisk, because when you think about it, back in 93 and 94 and 95, we were careful because I recognized that this group of fans was existing. Yeah, they were smart, but they were smart and somewhat respectful, if you'll remember, compared to overall today.
Yes.
And there were very much fewer of them. And we would actually tell the groups, now come on, guys, you're on Gilligan's Island, right? Don't smarten up my local fans. They don't want to be smart. It's they get a different type of enjoyment out of wrestling. And you guys, especially
Louisville,
in Louisville at the Gardens, when you almost caused a riot by being on the Smoky Mountain side in the Smoky Mountain USWA feud, you guys would go out and kayfabe for me, right? Basically, most of you.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the way that the old WFIA conventions were. There were a few fans like, Eloise Mascaro from Dallas. She loved the Von Erich boys. She was an old grandmotherly type, and I don't think she was smart. There was a few that weren't smart that just came because they loved wrestling, but you would kind of feel it out. And then there was the contingent like Barry Rose and Pete Lederberg from Philly, and Walt Wolanski from Philly. Pete and Barry were from Florida, and me and Norman Dooley went with me to Memphis one year from Louisville. Anyway, we would seek each other out and feel each other out to see if we were smart, and then we didn't have to kayfabe with each other, right? And we could have fun on our level. It was like that, and the shoot interviews. At least that we did, it was done for those groups. I mean, there was no tape business of that point for shoot interviews. And I don't know that I would have done it because I tried to, on a mainstream level, on a platform where a lot of people were going to hear what I had to say, I was one of the last to do them because then I figured, well, fuck, now that it's just readily available everywhere, I at least want to tell the truth instead of all this bullshit people are hearing. But so I was one of the first ones to do some, but it was on for that limited group. And then I tried to resist doing it for everybody until so many other people had done it and set such bad precedent. I want to try to straighten it out. Does that make any sense?
Makes complete sense. It's funny you bring up Louisville. I recently had a revelation I had not had before, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But, during that show, and, we foolishly were cheering the heels. The Smoky Mountain people are the people who drove us to the show. We were cheering. And at some point during the show, they put the spotlight on us. And it was said over the PA, it looks like there's some fans from Smoky Mountain here.
That was probably Randy
Dean
Hales.
I was going to ask.
I was sure it was Dean Hill. It was probably Randy Hales playing ha-ha, telling Dean, and we're going to put the spotlight, announce these fuckers. That's probably what it was. Because remember, that's that. And to my everlasting dismay, I was not there that night because it was after our TV taping, which was part of Fan Week also. And I had a day to turn around and get down to the production center to start post-production on the show that was going to air the following week or whatever. So I didn't make the trip to Louisville. And
you were there.
Was I there?
It was you and Hildebrand against Randy Hales and Frank Morrell, I believe.
Son of a bitch, that's right. It was another year. Okay, anyway, yes, you're right, because I saw that match on YouTube not long ago, and remembered having the match then when I saw it. But I at least wasn't on the bus.
Right. Well, luckily we
from Hildebrand, afterwards that y'all got chased down the goddamn street.
We got a police escort. They emptied the building. And it was just us in there at that point. Randy Hales came over to us and, in an amusing fashion, asked every one of us where we were from. And then we got let out the back of the building, and I had never seen so many fans still there so far after a show, lining the walkway. They were all over the place. And, we were walking next to each other as closely as possible to get back to. Luckily, we didn't have the bus that year. We had minivans. And my car was driven by D'Lo Brown, and Brian Hildebrand was in the lead car. And they gave us a police escort to the city line. And once we get past the city line, we start speeding up. And I swear, maybe 2 minutes later, we get pulled over. A cop comes and pulls us over for speeding. And he goes to the head car, and he goes up to Brian Hildebrand. He says, license and registration. And Brian says, officer, we just had a police escort to the city limits. I'm a professional wrestler. We were just part of the show. And, I'm sorry. This is why we're speeding. We're just trying to get to safety. And the officer says, license and registration, please. And as he says that a second time, someone drives by and throws a bottle, and it hits the officer's foot. And the guy yells, Smoky Mountain sucks. And he let us go. That's what got us off.
And say, I do remember this much now. That's right. I had snuck out basically because we wrestled earlier and I was blowed up, I'm sure, and I got out of there before the last match traffic.
Well, you had Memphis the next night. We went back to Knoxville.
That's right. I had to go on to Memphis, and you guys went back to Knoxville. Oh, my God. How did I do that in those days and not even being on drugs?
I'll tell you. The only fan from Fan Week who didn't go to the show in Louisville was Marty Gorman because he wanted to watch the Clash of the Champions on TV.
Well, poor Marty, he was a real hothead. There is still footage floating around somewhere, and I'm sure I have some of it here at the castle, of that picnic where Jimmy Del Rey, poor Marty Gorman, bless him, bless him, bless him, but he wasn't that quick. And he had that way of speaking. He was very New Jersey-ish or Northeast or whatever, Brooklyn-ish or whatever. You know the difference. You're from around those parts. And he was mooning over Tammy and talking to her, Sonny, and not paying any attention. And Jimmy Del Rey was ashing his cigarette on the top of Marty Gorman's baseball cap, and then he squirted a little lighter fluid because we're having a cookout. They started the barbecue with lighter fluid, right? He squirts lighter fluid on Marty Gorman's hat, and then when he ashed it, it went up in flames, and Marty Gorman is still talking to Tammy and mooning over Tammy while his head's on fucking fire. It was fucking great.
The way I always heard it, and I guess you can confirm or deny this for me, was that Marty decided to pull the because Tammy had boots in her lap, decided to pull something like "I'd like to pet your pussy" line, and that's why Del Rey got upset and lit his hat on fire.
I don't think Del Rey was upset. I think.
Jimmy, he wasn't upset. He was
not upset, but still. Yeah. But that I heard that it was some. I remember hearing that was what set him off.
I'm telling you, Jimmy Del Rey. We would all have done this if we could. He just wanted happened to be able to get behind him and be unnoticed, and that's why he did. We weren't trying to. We were going. If he had caught fire, we would have put him out. We weren't trying to hurt him. Brian, you'll testify to that. It was all.
I will test.
Good fun. We set the man on fire.
And he wasn't upset either because the first thing he did when he realized his head was on fire was he got up, he shook off his hat to put the flame out, and he said, "Oh, that's an $8 hat." Yeah. But anyway, I'm so excited that we have a Goyim guest on the show, Bix, that I'm hogging the talk time. I'm sure you have plenty of things you would like to jump off with.
Well, yeah, like one of the things I was thinking about was like, I think about with your books and stuff, even you've said on podcasts and shoots, but mostly the stuff you put in the books. You're like the most honest and upfront person in the history of the wrestling business when it comes to payoffs. The payoffs you got, the payoffs you gave people. Like, do you think that's from being a longtime hardcore fan? Do you think that's just because you're a pack rat with the records? Both? Like,
well, as far as reporting stuff, and I've only gotten worse as I've gotten older. I've always read nonfiction books, biographies, and books on the entertainment business, movie and television, radios, and radio. I mean, I'm seriously the old radio industry, not old radios themselves, but it's at any type of entertainment, rock and roll, music business. I love facts, and if I'd have been a real sports fan, I'm sure I'd have been a big statistics nerd. But I love the attendances and the gates and the payoffs and the money that was drawn and the money that was made and et cetera, and results of matches and facts about wrestling. And so I have had a good memory for them. I've always saved clippings and programs so I can visualize lineups and territories and talent rosters in my mind from years gone by. And I saved a lot of this information and memorabilia because I always thought it was cool. So now in my old age, as I travel less and get to crack open boxes and stacks and of my collection and use these facts to write cool books for wrestling fans and collectors. And it keeps me off the streets at night.
Yeah, because I always get a kick out of that stuff too, and like me, and also like, you know, Chris Harrington, who, because his thing now is like WrestleNomics, so he'll analyze like stuff related to WWE business primarily, but like he and I, you know, both, now that we both like try to look for stuff in old lawsuits, like, you know, when he found Hogan's WCW contract and blew up the internet with it, that was fascinating to me too, because you're trying to figure out the numbers and everything. Because it's not just about the individual person, because I could see why some certain wrestlers or people in the business would not want their information out there, but to me it's more of a frame of reference of what it means to the business overall.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we're not trying to, print people's social security numbers or, delve into their personal finances, but on stuff like this, it's interesting to see what, how the business evolved and what major figures in it were. I've got a copy right here somewhere in my I'm sitting here looking at like 20 file cabinet drawers full of stuff, and I have a huge double closet and then the giant vault itself. I've got a copy of Sable's Playboy contract. The reason I do is I was working in the office at the time, and Jim Ross and Jim Cornette were next to each other in the hole on the, Howie the mailroom guy would stick the memos in. And somehow I grab my shit and take it home. I'm in the car, or I get out of the car, and I look on top, and there's Playboy, Sable. What the fuck? It's supposed to be Jim Ross. Well, I cried for 3 days when I found out how much that talentless twat got for showing everybody her fucking manufactured tits. It made me almost suicidal of time. Now, then I knew how Ole Anderson felt when in 1986, Huntington, West Virginia, at the Great American Bash stop, he looked at me because he knew that I was on top in the match with Baby Doll, whereas he and Arn were working with the Rock and Roll underneath. And the Midnight Night, we had Dusty and Baby Doll and Magnum, and he said, "Well, I can't believe I work all my life in my career in this wrestling business so that a fat manager and a fucking cunt can come in and get a better payoff of me." I said, "Well, I want to thank you, Ole, for blazing the trails. I can come in here and swoop in and make this money." Then I felt, when I saw Sable's contract, I felt like fucking Ole. Jesus Christ, if I'd have just known how to pick the right plastic surgeon, I could have made $1 million in 1 year.
Well, I think one of the things that we would like to talk to you about is just the early days of tape trading. So we know you were one of the first people to really tape not just the wrestling you were getting in Louisville, but try to find ways to tape wrestling from anywhere you could.
Yes.
And then trade it around. But, before we even get to that, there is something I want to discuss. One of the ongoing topics each week so far on the show has been the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame. We've debated whether certain people should be in, certain people that are in who maybe shouldn't be in. I have been saying that I think Ole Anderson deserves to be in, and I even think the Junkyard Dog deserves to be in because he has a 5-year period where he was the Hall of Famer from the Mid-South territory, as well as a touring attraction, at some point too. So I do want to ask you about one that, has become somewhat controversial in the last few years amongst, I don't know if you want to call them the smart fans or the smark fans, but Satoru Sayama, and I bring this up because I'm sure that in your early days of tape trading, finding tapes of Tiger Mask must have been a pretty big deal.
Oh my God, yes.
There's now this contingent amongst fans who think that he wasn't very good, and Bix may be one of them, actually.
What?
That Sayama wasn't very good. His psychology was terrible. His matches weren't that great, and he was only a star for 2 years. And I don't know. It's interesting, the time frame, the 2 years is an interesting part, but this sudden. You're
shocking me because I thought the fuck that he was already in.
No, he is a Hall of Famer, but it's
okay. Oh, so people want to take him out?
I don't think people debate him as a Hall of Famer, though. I think they just debate whether his stuff holds up.
Oh, Jesus Christ! But here's the thing. To me, the reason why he was had a very short period of time in the wrestling business initially, and he made who knows how many comebacks since then, but the run was because Inoki was fucking with his money. He was a major. Right. No, he was a major fucking draw, a major ratings draw, a major celebrity, and the first lighter weight major money draw in Inoki's company. And the reason why he left, and once he left and then went to the shoot group and it got all sideways, the magic was Tiger Mask and he couldn't recreate it again. But it was because Inoki was fucking with his money and they had a business breakup. That's the only reason his run ended when it did. He would have been bigger. His stuff with Dynamite Kid to me stands up because if you look at that still today, if you look at a tape of the two of them having their matches, they were revolutionizing a lighter weight wrestling style in that country that led to a bunch of people revolutionizing a few years later here in this country because they were fans of those matches, but they still looked like they were having a competition. They didn't let the prettiness of the moves or the complicatedness of the spots interfere with the fact that they were simulating a contest. And so some of it did look ugly and did look painful and probably was. Dynamite Kid's in a fucking wheelchair, right? And he wasn't a fucking garden of roses to work with when he was simulating a conflict. So there was a lot of live rounds going on in those matches. I think they're as good today as they were then, and you can't hardly say that. You know, that's Flair Steamboat quality stuff in the 80s that would still be as good today. And I think that they are.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is, and I'm with you, but certain people judge those matches almost against the high-flying matches that would come after it, as opposed to looking at them in a time capsule.
Well, I can actually tell you you're wrong about that, because most of the people who have become kind of anti-Sayama I'm not necessarily one of them. I can see where they're coming from, but it's more from the perspective of Fujinami, I'm watching this stuff from either from right before, where Fujinami or Gran Hamada or guys like that were maybe not quite as athletically impressive, but were fairly close. And they're kind of thinking, well, what was the big deal? And I guess what I'll ask you,
it was the gimmick. It was the fucking gimmick. What the fuck? Well, not only
to American fans, not to Japanese fans.
But no. And also, Hamada was actually, even to me, more athletic than Sayama.
Well, that's kind of what
Hamada was fucking fantastic, but he didn't have the pretty mask, and he didn't have those pretty tights, and he didn't have that smooth body. And fucking Fujinami was a little too fucking white bread, white meat, plain old regular fella guy at that point. And later on he became a nice heavyweight, and that's what you wanted there. But they had a comic book fucking hero that all the kids knew. They put a fucking cool looking outfit on him, and he fulfilled the Bruce Lee fucking fantasy that everybody was having in those days from 1972 until fucking mid-late 80s. Bruce Lee was the coolest thing in the world as far as fighting. And he had even worked the Bruce Lee gimmick in England before he came back, so he had all the moves. And it was just, and plus he was so fucking fast. He was faster than anybody else, but he still did the shit right. That's what he had. It was one of those things. It was the right place. They wanted a fucking kid's hero. They wanted a flashier star. He was homegrown. It wasn't like they were bringing in Dynamite from England or some other babyface from Steve Wright from Germany or whatever. All those people were foils for him. He beat people from every continent because he was a Japanese superhero. The only way they could fuck it up was Inoki fucked with his money because it was fucking bulletproof.
And that happened right around the same time that New Japan imploded. They survived, but that's when Shinma was ousted. There was a big
and it was Shinma's
scandal.
Gimmick. Shinma was the guy that was in charge of the whole fucking thing. So that's what. Once again, Tiger Mask would have probably been goddamn one of the top 3 for 10 fucking years if it not for all that shit going on.
Yeah. Well, going back to where we started with this tape trading, as I said, I assumed and
yeah, we just jumped off and went off on a fucking tangent. We're supposed to be paying attention here. Tape trading, yes.
Tape trading. So when you first started, when did you first get your VCR or beta machine, and what were you taping And when did you start trading with other people?
I got VHS first because they were easier to find. And here's the thing. First, me and Bolin. Kenny Bolin lived in LaGrange in Oldham County. He lived on the second floor of a building on a hill right in the middle of downtown. And so if he put a antenna on his roof, he got great signals, especially from Cincinnati. But he also got Channel 4 from Indianapolis, so we could watch the Chic Show from Cincinnati at his house. We both, in my house out in Middletown, I could get Channel 4 from Bloomington, Indiana, so we could both watch Bruisers TV. And then obviously we both had Louisville. And what I did was I put a 10-foot mast on top of my mom's tri-level house with a rotor on it so I could turn and then the biggest Weingart home antenna. It was 12 feet across. And the biggest one they made, and I put that up there, and I could turn the antenna in every direction, and I hunted wrestling programs. And we actually, at one point, Kenny Bolin talked to one of the smart kids at Oldham County High School who said, look here, if you take that fucking antenna wire that's attached to that TV and you put it in the phone receiver in some fashion and tie it around some of the wires and you make a long-distance call to a particular city, you'll be able to pick up those local cities' fucking TV stations. And we were actually going to try it one time, and his mother wouldn't let us take his phone apart. But anyway, so finally, he and I had been we were over at his house one Saturday morning, and after wrestling on Channel 3, we went over to Tice's furniture store because that's where they had one of the brand new VCRs. This was the fall of 1979. And that thing was beautiful. And they cost about a VHS machine that you could record to. And they just came out with a deal where you could record 4 hours on a 2-hour tape. You had the capability to do one or the other, right? And it was only $1,000 for that VCR. Wow. Fuck, we loved it. And he started going over there and taping Jerry Lawler's matches on the Saturday morning wrestling show from that point on. And God damn it, he was intending to buy the machine, and they were going to keep the tape for him, but he took so long before he ever came up with the money, the tape went somewhere. But in December, for an early Christmas present for myself, from picture money I made, I spent the fucking $1,000 and got a Magnavox VHS machine. And it actually had a remote control. You plugged the remote control in the back, and you could pause it or unpause it from the bed. That was the remote control. And it had a timer on it. You could set the timer to record any program in the next 24 hours, as long as it was on the channel that, you had this thing set on. So,
yeah.
Anyway, and I bought it to record wrestling, and that's the first program that I fucking recorded, and I still have the tapes that I recorded Saturday morning Memphis wrestling show on from that point forward. And then the next year I got a beta because the picture quality was better, and the only reason that they lost the format war was because the porn industry in Southern California picked VHS. And so I still have all those beta tapes, and the picture quality is tremendous. And I started again. Then the 6-hour VCR came out, and immediately I started trying to find tapes of wrestling from other places. And this guy in Detroit named Marty Slobin had contacts all over the place, and I got the first appearance of the Freebirds on Memphis TV from him, and I also got Sheik's TV from him, but I also got Georgia Atlanta TV with DiBiase taking the 6 pile drivers, and and there was a small group of us, but we just tried to get everything positive. And Walt Wolanski really helped me out because he had a connection. Not only would he go to Japan every so often, but he had a connection over there that would send him the tapes, and he'd watch them and then send them to me. I'd buy them from him or trade him stuff or whatever. So I have every Baba and Inoki show from the 80s ever. Wow. I have on my desk shelves here, I have a complete library on Super VHS from one of the Japanese wrestling stores of every Tiger Mask match that ever aired on television. The copies of the laser discs of the Inoki and Baba greatest matches. I've got in the vault probably more than 3,000 individual VHS and beta tapes of wrestling from everywhere, from the late 70s, mostly 80s, early 90s, and then some stuff that you can find from the 50s and 60s when it's out there. But it's I'll never be able to transfer it all to DVD, but I'm starting to try with my favorite stuff first.
Well, as far as the stuff other people wouldn't have, is that primarily Memphis stuff? Like the stuff you'd dub off the masters and some of the stuff you taped yourself? Or is there other stuff besides Memphis that you got from someone within the business or whatever that you think probably isn't out there?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I started realizing about 15 years ago when I would say, well, everybody's seen that or everybody has that people are looking at me dumbstruck. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I was like, oh, yeah, 20 years ago, everybody had that or everybody's seen that. It's so old. It's gotten so old. It's new again. It's out there on YouTube, a lot of it, but a lot of people don't know where to look. I've got one room with all this shit. And I mean, I have picked up quite a few interesting and strange and one or a few of a kind things. A guy gave me some old Cow Palace films from San Francisco, 8mm, just brief highlights. I've got highlights of the Atlanta City Auditorium in the late 60s with Gunkel and the Assassins and Enrique Torres but once again, silent film footage. But I've got stuff from Australia in the glory days, and some of the Bob Loose stuff that everybody's seen, but it's so cool, from Chicago, and just a little bit of everything here. You will never in this house. I will never be short of classic wrestling to watch. And I have about 4 or 5 different machines in every tape format to ensure that I can continue to watch it for quite some time.
When you were first trading tapes, though, what did you find was the consensus? Were there people out there wanting Memphis? Were they interested in Memphis? What was the thought about the territory?
Oh, yeah, especially when people found out that I, had good-looking stuff that, see, I could make a copy. A lot of people had shitty cable systems back then because a lot of people are too young to remember when you had cable, sometimes your picture was better if you had rabbit ears than on the cable systems. But you may be just old enough because you were in New York, Brian, to remember some of that. But
yeah,
a lot of cable systems had shitty pictures. My stuff looked good, and I could make copies of it. It still looked good because I never let my originals go. And people love to see, especially Danny Davis, the Nightmare, my old partner at OVW. He was one of the early guys to get a VCR also. He liked to watch his matches and critique his shit. So he would tape the Jackson show for me, the matches from the Coliseum in Memphis on Monday nights where they would air in Jackson and Tupelo that already got Memphis TV. It was a secondary show. So I get matches like that from him. And Ken Wayne was a big early video freak too. And then some of the other, fans that wanted to trade back and forth. And as Atlanta TV spread because of the cable, that, was pretty easy to get. But some of the other territories were a little harder. You had to know people. And that was the key in trying to establish a connection. Well, I didn't have to just offer Memphis. I could offer, I've got a lot of other stuff, folks.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was like movies, because movies, when I got my first VHS VCR, if you wanted to go into one of the 2 or 3 stores in a good-sized town that might carry pre-recorded VHS that wasn't porno, actual movies like Star Wars, etc., they were $99 a piece if you wanted to buy them, or $20 a night if you wanted to rent them.
That's right.
So there was a big market in movies. But actually, after the first year or two, wrestling started outstripping it. And so the people had said, hey, I'll give you Raiders of the Lost Ark. No, just give me more of that Detroit wrestling.
So now when you go to Mid-South at the end of 83, you have this VCR and you have this beta machine at home. Did you bring one with you? And now, I'm just wondering, because you're a wrestling fan, and obviously
I'll tell you exactly what I fucking did. By then I had a VHS machine, I had a beta machine, and I think I had a secondary VHS. And I took my tapes have always stayed with me. I've gone through a lot of furniture. But I still have all of my original tapes. Yes, I set up a command center, and I had one machine set because in Alexandria, Louisiana, where we lived in Mid-South, we got TV stations from Lafayette, Louisiana, from Alexandria, from Monroe, I think one of the stations on our little cake, because the cities weren't that far from each other. It was a very weird setup. Anyway, and especially when they had Mid-South Wrestling and then they added Power Pro Wrestling, a secondary show. So I'd set one machine for one show, the other machine for the other show, blah, blah, blah. I have a tape of – I started getting stuff from Bruce Pritchard in Houston. of Houston wrestling with Paul Bosch and our matches that we'd have there that they'd air on that TV show that wouldn't make the main Mid-South show. So I have most of the stuff we did in Houston. Joel Watts filled in a few holes for me later on because he liked Japanese wrestling. So I'd give Joel some Japanese stuff, and he'd give me Midnight Express matches they taped. And then when I went to Dallas, the same thing. I taped every show. If I was on the road, I set the VCRs. And then the same thing in the Carolinas got. You should have seen my fucking setup because. But now the Carolinas was a challenge because back then, once again, in the old days, the cable systems were fidgety and maybe you could only record whatever your cable box was set to. Well, I had a variety of splitters and things I got from Radio Shack that would enable me to go into the tuners in each of the VCRs that I had. I was taping the 2-hour Saturday night TBS show, the hour Sunday night TBS show, 2 hours of syndication on 2 different stations that Crockett had in the Charlotte market, and then a half an hour Super Bout show that aired on Channel 3 in Charlotte as well. That was every weekend. So I have literally hundreds of tapes from my years living in Charlotte between 85 and 90.
Wow.
So is that what Super Bouts was?
And it wasn't just because I was the biggest wrestling fan in the world. At that point, at the level that we were at, especially working for Crockett with that talent roster was unbelievable from Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes on down, and the Horsemen and the Road Warriors and Magnum and Nikita and and the Rock and Roll and etc. I watched back every single television performance that we ever did to critique in my head. Did my promo, did I say what I wanted to say? Could I said it better? With the matches, which moves are getting over, which ones aren't? What do we need to polish? So we'll talk about it in the car on the way to the next show. And then I also watched the other tag teams and some of the other guys to do their promos, not only to see if we worked with them, what their styles were and what they did in the ring and what they talked like, but also to see if we were still doing better than they were. Are we still out? Am I still out talking this one guy? Are we still out fucking wrestling these other guys? You know, I kept an eye on that shit. So it was professional as well as being a fan.
You know, at that time, I got a question. Something just popped into my head. What do you think was the main show? Was it worldwide or was it the Saturday night TBS show?
You know, actually, the main show that made stars was the Saturday night TBS show. The main show that showed angles and did business was worldwide.
Okay.
Because the TBS show, everybody in the country could watch it, and it looked like we were national stars, and it was just a series of matches and interviews to mostly get guys over. Every once in a while, they'd do an angle in the studio, you remember, but most time it was matches to get guys over and promos to get guys over, and they would show footage from the syndicated TV of this big, heinous act. Because it was also easier to do angles, and Dusty realized that, and even though there was a ton of angles done in the TBS studio, it was easier to do major angles, heavy angles, in front of an arena crowd for that feedback and that emotion and et cetera, et cetera. My God, there's Star Maker Bolin calling me now. He realized I'm getting publicity. And so, so a lot of the heavy specific angles, and also because that worldwide show, syndicated TV, was airing on a local broadcast affiliate in a market that they were going to run a live show in. So the angle showed on the same station that people watched for their local news and for their network programming, whatever the American Idol was, the biggest network shows in 1980, whatever. They were watching that station, and they saw their wrestling there too. And that's as soon as they saw that angle, there was the local promo where we were saying, we're coming to Greensboro at the Coliseum, and we're going to settle things once and for all. So that was what drew the money at the gate at the house shows. The TBS show made national TV stars.
You know, when I think about the Midnight Express during that time period, I think when you ask anyone, the first thing that pops into anyone's head as far as opponents go is Rock and Roll Express. And if you ask tape collectors or newsletter readers, maybe Fantastics, because of the matches were, you know, in my eyes, slightly better. Some people say the Road Warriors because of your torn ACL. And, you know, I think maybe the most underrated thing you guys ever did was the feud with Barry Windham and Ron Garvin.
That was a good one, too. Not only were Ronnie and Barry both really great in really completely different ways, but we got a chance to go back to it and break off from it, go back to it again, and the fireball helped things. It just, it was, they brought Jimmy Garvin in and fleshed out a little bit more. But my favorite part of the matches with Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham was watching Bobby Eaton and Barry Windham when they were probably the two best wrestlers in the world.
Yeah.
Just completely ass off and be better than everybody else on the card. Like in Fayetteville one night, they had a match on their knees. They were hip tossing and body slamming each other from their knees. Bobby was hitting the second rope. He'd come off and hit the second rope, and Windham would be on his knees, and he would backdrop him or hip toss him. Bobby would drop kick Windham while he was on his knees. Windham would take a fucking bump and roll up, but the arm drags on their knees. It was, and it was good. And the fans could not tell that they were assing off. They were so fucking talented that they could give themselves a handicap and still be better than most of the guys on the card.
Ted DiBiase's in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, and I think the argument for him is work rate. For a period of 10 years or so, he was considered one of the best workers in wrestling.
Yeah.
Do you think Barry Windham should be in the Hall of Fame?
Yes. Barry, when he was the best he was better than Ted ever was.
I agree.
Barry wasn't the best he was for very long, maybe 5 or 6 years there, and then he got sideways with WCW and management, with the Herd regime. I don't think he ever recovered from that. He went back and forth a few times. He had some injuries, but the Barry Windham that wrestled Ric Flair in Fayetteville or in Greensboro or at the Crockett Cup in 1987, or the one that was on top in Florida in 85, or even in 83, 84-ish, in there all of a sudden he was the best worker in ring in the business, and it just effortless it looked like, and his shit was believable and at the same time pretty. And so, I think, he never got the chance to draw the money that I think he should have drawn. And the timing was, he was going to be Dusty's guy when he decided to take a deal with Vince. And that's where Dusty used Magnum. Magnum got the Barry spot. And then, unfortunately, when Magnum was injured, Nikita was right there, and it became the Nikita spot. And then by the time they brought Barry in and tried to do it again, that's when Crockett got into trouble, and et cetera, et cetera. The timing never worked out, but he was the best in the ring in the business at one time.
Right. For about, 6 or 7 years, he was at least top 5, maybe 1 or 2 during that whole entire period of time. And, that's the whole thing I talk about. Ted DiBiase was inducted in 96 in that initial class where Dave just, picked the guys who we thought belonged to be in. And I think, I hate to put someone down, but when you look back now in retrospect and you say, I don't know if Ted DiBiase, if Barry Windham's not in there, why is Ted DiBiase in there if it's the same criteria?
And also people that you think of kind of, because they were sort of similar. They had a similar style to a point that you sort of, the comparison between the two kind of comes naturally.
But at least Vince Senior's limo driver isn't in, so they got that going for him.
Smoky Mountain Wrestling has been in the news all of a sudden lately because one of their purges of some footage that actually gets on the network.
Well, suddenly it's a highlight reel of me right over the last month because they put up Mid-South when I was there, Mid-Atlantic when I was there, Smoky Mountain I was there, obviously there. So I feel so flattered. I'm showing them how to do it right.
So are you going to the WWE?
No. I'm already there. They're showing me on every program I've ever done, so I don't need to go there, and that's the way I'd like to keep it.
Bix, I'm wondering, what were your early memories? When was the first time you saw Smoky Mountain Wrestling?
I remember first being aware of it, I guess not long after it would have started from PWI. But I was not really buying tapes until I think the first Smoky Mountain tape I got was actually the TV. It was in '95 with the TV of the Super Bowl show.
Wow!
Oh, well, yeah. So you debuted with us right as we were about to go out of business. Perfect timing.
Yeah, but I mean, I love. I mean, that's a good that's a good batch of shows, though, between the Super Bowl stuff and the Landell turn. And,
oh yeah.
I mean,
Well, and also, I just, poor Buddy, we finally got a chance to make him the big baby face in his hometown. And then after that August show, whereas everybody know we pretty much filled the place up and set a record. And then shit just went south. And that was that malaise of the wrestling industry in general in late 95. But I wrote a recent article for Fighting Spirit magazine, which will come out shortly on the last days, Thanksgiving weekend, 1995 of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And it wasn't a wonderful memory to relive, but I wish we could have run more with Buddy's babyface turn. And also I had set up for Christmas that year. The one thing that I just hate that we didn't get a chance to present, everybody in the Armstrong family for the first time was going to be free and available to be in the same place. And we were going to do a 10-man tag with Bob and his sons. And that was Christmas. And we folded up after Thanksgiving. So,
oh man.
But it just in Knoxville that one night only. It was going to be so fucking cool.
Who were they going to work against? I
can't even fucking remember. I could get in my book and tell you, but it wouldn't even have mattered. I think just that night it would have been so special, And we're going to do some bullshit like, 3 out of 5 falls, so it would just go on forever and blah, blah, blah.
The first Smoky Mountain I saw, I got it. I also saw them like you, Bix, in the After Mags. I remember thinking like, holy shit, Paul Orndorff's alive. And he's in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And there's Jim.
The rumors of his demise were greatly exaggerated.
Yeah, and I was surprised. There's Jim and Stan because, I was a big fan of the Midnight Express, and then you were gone from WCW. I remember seeing you, maybe once or twice on Global because I got that on ESPN in New York.
And seeing you on LPWA and showing up in random places like that.
Yeah, well, Joe Pedicino was getting me a monthly trip to Las Vegas, man, on that deal.
I still remember the line Stan Lane introduced you with on Global. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the man who taught Pee Wee Herman all that he knows, Jim Cornette." But then,
actually, I think at that time, I can't remember. Somebody got mad at me because I said at the time, the thing is, I said that Pee Wee Herman wanted to act as his own lawyer at the trial because he was absolutely certain that he could get himself off. and anyway, go ahead, continue.
On that topic, there used to be it may have been the one on a Delphi radio, Bix. There used to be a college radio show.
Oh yes, Dave Pile Driver Schwartz.
And there was a Jim Cornette audio bite, building up the show each week. He must have gotten it at a Resi convention because he was from New York. And he said, I'm sitting here eating a Pee Wee Herman sandwich. That's a Reuben, hold the pickle. And I always thought that was the funniest line. But yeah, so I ended up going.
I remember that being Heyman, not.
No, that was
okay.
That was Jim, I think.
It sounds good. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was Jim. But I went to John Arezzi had a sponsor at that time, the notorious, infamous L&S Comics in Merrick, New York, who bootlegged everything until Jerry McDivitt shut them down. And
see, I like them because I never got any dub tapes from them.
Yeah, exactly. I got dub tapes from them before I knew any better. It was right when I started tape trading. And I got my first Smoky Mountain tape from them. And it was either the end of November or December 1992. And it was amazing. The tape started in the middle of an episode. And the first thing I saw was Bob Armstrong being interviewed by Bob Caudle. And I loved Bob Caudle, and I just forgotten about him. He was just gone from WCW. I was like, whatever happened to that old guy? And there he was on Smoky Mountain. And I'll never forget it because I didn't know who the Mongolian Stomper was. I'd never seen him. I'd never read about him in any of the magazines up here. By that time, he wasn't really in the magazines.
Well, and the magazines never, or at least the London after, whatever we want to call them magazines, they never really covered Knoxville or Calgary.
Yeah, they pretty much ignored them.
Well, but Stomper had gotten some publicity in the early 70s in the magazines. But by then, because he had settled when the Knoxville territory pretty much faded away, he got a job with the sheriff's department in Knoxville. So that was the end of his traveling days. But, he had been a pretty big star anywhere in the business 15 years before that. Anyway, continue on. The point is, when you first see Archie, when you first see the Stomper, the very first time you think, that's a wild-looking fucking man, right?
Well, the first time I saw him, I didn't know what his name was. And I thought it was something else because Bob Armstrong goes, "We have the Monster Stomper coming back." And I was like, who? And he messed up his name. And he accused the Monster Stomper. And then you put on a tape it must have been, I don't know, 73, 72, of the Stomper against Dennis Condrey in the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis.
Yes, 75.
Yeah. And I was like, whoa, who's this guy? And then on that episode, you had Kevin Sullivan in the Night Stalker, who I'm not a big Brian Clark fan. I don't think anyone really is. I don't know if anyone's ever said I'm a big Brian Clark Night Stalker fan. But he was perfect with Sullivan. I mean, it's one of those really underrated things, is that little group. Perfect.
Well, yeah, and see, that was the thing, is that Brian Clark was coming up with Paul Orndorff because they were both living in Atlanta. And obviously, Brian Clark's role was to drive the car, and Paul Orndorff's role was to fucking let him, because Paul was the veteran and Brian was a rookie. But Kevin saw the kid, looked great, he had a good attitude, and he had the Night Stalker gimmick, and that kind of fit in with Kevin's flavor. So when Paul would be working with Ronnie Garvin or whatever angle he was doing, you know, we programmed the kid with Kevin and his group against whoever the fuck, Brian Lee. So that way Kevin was able to work with all those guys either in his group or against them and teach them something, because he was a veteran and they were younger guys. So it worked out well for everybody.
And the other thing I remember about that tape, and it may not have been in that episode, it may have been just on that tape from, you know, the weeks before or a week right after, was you had the Tracy Smothers interview, like on his front porch, where he, in one of the greatest interviews, he says, you know, the WCW said I was from Cheyenne, Wyoming. I got nothing against them, but I've never even been to Wyoming.
Yeah. and he was out on the lake in his boat, and we played the music. It was Skinner. All I Can Do Is Write About It. And it was once again, a lot of people, for some reason, they go, well, that shit wouldn't play nationally. Well, that's why it wasn't playing fucking nationally by design, you morons. I wasn't trying to get people over in Washington State or Wyoming. I got nothing against them people. But I was trying to get people over in East Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky and Western Virginia. And that's for the kind of people who like that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing those people like. That's why it worked.
Thinking about Smoky Mountain Wrestling and thinking about Fan Week when I was there in '94, I appreciate some of the stuff and I like some of the stuff, but I'm not a major fan of Terry Funk's ECW stuff, especially when he became the Desperado babyface. So, I mean, in a way, I kind of think maybe the usage of Terry Funk at Smoky Mountain in '94 was really one of the last great times that he was used as that, crazy Texas heel.
Well, yeah, because we couldn't make Terry a babyface in East Tennessee because there needed to be a smart fan population who respected Terry for his incredible talent and knew and recognized it, etc., to make Terry a babyface. That was existing at the time in Philadelphia, but it wasn't in Knoxville. But what they did remember was that Terry Funk used to come in and he and Bullet Bob Armstrong would have goddamn great matches for the world title or the big rivalries or whatever, and Bob's the big baby face, and there's no way Terry Funk is going to be more popular than Bob Armstrong in Knoxville, so we went with the natural pairing. Me bringing in a former nemesis of Bullet Bob Armstrong's from when he was a wrestler to try to knock him out of the spot as commissioner.
Do you, on this topic, do you think, in terms of what you've seen, you can't base it on anything you've heard about, but do you think Memphis used Terry Funk better than anyone else?
Oh, overall in history?
Yeah.
No.
Based
gosh.
on what you've seen, not what you've heard or what,
Well,
obviously we never saw Amarillo television.
Well, but then also Florida for so many years. And I mean, going back to the early 70s and then Georgia, the Funks, even back when Terry was a young, babyface and Dory and Senior and Junior were the team. They were in St. Louis. Terry he wasn't a wild, crazy lunatic there. He was a wrestler and a world champion. He had so many different great runs in different places. I think, once again, it's the tape age. His matches specifically, and I'll say it again, March 23rd, 1981, Mid-South Coliseum, Jerry Lawler and Terry Funk. I was there live. Probably the most exciting live wrestling match I have ever seen, which is saying something.
Yeah.
He and Lawler had great matches in that run in 1981. It was captured, a lot of it on tape, and the people remember the empty Coliseum match, even though it wasn't great physically. It was a great, landmark moment. and the matches were so fucking good. I think, people have tapes of that and they remember that, but Terry was good in Florida for so many years, and he was good in a variety of, like I said, I just mentioned a variety of places. He went to the Carolinas in and out, quite a bit. So, I don't know if they use him better than anybody else, but he definitely made an impact, and people remembered it. And they just remember he just drew 1,000 people in Jackson, Tennessee 2 months ago against Lawler.
I just saw that. I saw the interview with him and Lance.
Yes, and he threatened to beat up Lance Russell at 90 years old. Lance is standing there 90, and Terry Funk is 72, I think, and he's threatening to beat him up. And here comes Lawler's 66, and people stand up and don't sit down for the rest of the night.
Bix, I just mentioned I saw the interview with Terry Funk and Lance Russell. When did the smart fans stop? Because I was a tape trader. I got catalogs. I saw things were listed. I talked to people. When did interviews start being called promos by the fans? Because that wasn't the way it was, when I was trading tapes in the 90s.
Well, no, it was when all the guys in the business suddenly decided that they had to tell everybody everything about the fucking thing to make themselves look good, I guess. I don't fucking know, because I hear wrestlers in the back use terminology that they think is terminology that the veterans used to use, and I'd never heard this shit before 10 years ago. I never heard these terms. I never heard these words, but they think they're being old school when they say this.
Like what?
They have different names for moves and things, and the double down. The double down. It was a double knockout. It wasn't but it's a double down. Just weird things that you go, wait, what the fuck? When did this? The handshake thing. Here's the deal. Yes, it was always the handshake thing in wrestling. If you shook with a light grip, it was a sign that you were a worker, right? That was the secret handshake. And some people took that to the extreme. It was like shaking hands with a dish rag. But at the same time, if you were shaking hands with a normal person, you were really supposed to put the fucking grip in there, because only the working handshake was only for the boys. And if you came in the locker room and said hello to everybody, it was a nice idea to shake everybody's fucking hand, right? But that was when there was 15 guys on the card, and the baby faces were all in one locker room and the heels were in the other. They come in, shake hands, and be done with it. You didn't find everybody related to the promotion, from the guy that sets up the fucking ring to to Vince McMahon himself. I would have never dreamed, if I'd have come into a TV taping or an arena and there was Jim Crockett and Dusty Rhodes huddled up in a corner discussing something, even when I was a main event talent, I would have never dreamed to gone up and got in between them to shake their hand and let them know that I was here. They would have said, good, now fucking leave, because you're fucking fired, because we're talking about the goddamn territory. Fuck, if the important people wanted you, they knew you were there, they'd come and find you. You sat in the fucking corner and shut the fuck up. Now everybody, I have to get there 2 hours early to discuss what I'm going to be doing with whoever the boss is, because I know that everybody from the ring guy to the fucking popcorn guy is going to come in and shake our fucking hand while we're talking.
Wrestling needs a great germaphobe who just refuses to be a part of this. When people come up to me, hands them a card, like, I'm sorry, I am a germaphobe. I will not shake your hand. Maybe a fist bump, but no handshakes.
We're going to nape with the point of the elbow.
Well, or you can do the kayfabe handshake, but do it so you don't even touch. And that way you're like, I'm working. That's how light I work.
You're reaching now, Bix. Let's continue. Let's jump back on. We've jumped off long enough.
Yeah, that was terrible.
It used to drive me crazy when I would go to Dennis's shows and I'd be in the locker room and workers would come up to me and give me the limp handshake. I was like, why? Why me? Why are you giving it to me? Give it to the guy you're working with.
See, that's what they pick up part of the information. It went from wrestlers doing that handshake to each other just to let each other know that they were in on the deal and gripping everybody else, to that's what the wrestler's handshake became, and they didn't know why they were doing it, so they did it to everybody like that, to all of a sudden now everybody's got to shake hands every time. And I guess they've taken off and in the WWE locker room, you get heat if you don't search everybody down in the building, because somehow it's become a veteran thing to do. Once again, I'm a veteran. I was in the locker room fucking before many of these people were born, and it was not a fucking thing.
It's really silly. I think even people are acknowledging how silly it is. Even wrestlers. I think I heard Shawn Michaels say how silly it is. But yet, he'll go there and be a part of it.
If he admits that something's fucking stupid, then it must be pretty fucking. He's as goofy as a rainbow trout in a car wash.
I mentioned Dennis Carluzzo, who was a great friend of mine, someone who gave me a lot of opportunity and chances in the wrestling business, and someone who regularly proclaimed to me that you were his best friend. And one of these days, I think Bix and I may do a Dennis Carluzzo tribute show, just telling stories and a little bit about him, just to make sure people don't forget about him. But I wonder,
and a documentary would even be. Can you imagine how classic that would be? Just to tell the story, the legend of Dennis Carluzzo.
I still to this day, and no one can make me not think that The Sopranos was partly based on Dennis, because
yes,
Bix, you didn't know. Dennis was very much like Tony Soprano, and even it resembled him somewhat.
Yeah.
And I remember after it started airing, I said to Dennis, I was like, you remind me of the guy. And Dennis goes, go look at my refrigerator. And I go to his refrigerator, and on his refrigerator is a picture of him with James Gandolfini. And the show had just started. It wasn't like it had been on for 2 years. It had just started. I'm like, how did you get this picture? Like, I met him at a place. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I met him at a place. Yeah, it was a diner on Route 42.
Yeah.
No, I swear I said that one time here years ago after Dennis had passed away, but I described Dennis. I said he was like the Sopranos without the murder and organized crime. Organized, I said. Without the organized crime. Yeah. And he was that's what made, back in 1986, meeting him and Frank Chili is what made Philadelphia, mine and Bobby and Dennis's favorite place to come to, because we, besides the fact the payoffs were great and the crowds were great, Dennis and Frank would take us out to eat and drive us around and pick us up, and they were fun to hang out with. So we had a great time. And then when Stan joined the team, he picked up on that too. And we always went to Ribbit afterwards. That's where I met Candido and Tammy.
Oh, yeah. I remember Ribbit.
So it was just that with Philadelphia once a month was like, great. And we always look forward to going to Philly. And a lot of it was because of Dennis.
I remember one time I used to spend a lot of time down there with Dennis and his sons, Mark and Dennis, who were good friends of mine. And I remember one time we were driving somewhere back from one of the diners. He had like 3 diners that he loved, and you always went to the same 3. And we were driving back, and there was a mosque right at the red light we were at. And he opens his window and just starts yelling, go back home, USA, USA. And I brought it up to someone at the next show. I said, yeah, it was the funniest thing. Dennis did this. And I forget who it was. I wish I could remember. They said, that's nothing. I was in the car with him once, and it was a red light, and he got out of the car, and someone was working for him that weekend with a flag, and he had the flag on the trunk, and he started waving the flag in the street in front of the mosque, screaming, USA, USA.
Hey, I remember it might have been one of the Eddie Gilbert Memorial shows, or might just when I was up in Connecticut, I would go down a lot more often because I was right there for Dennis's shows. And at one of the big ones, he had the conference, not the conference room, but the big, the presidential suite at whatever hotel it was, at the Philly airport or whatever. Yeah. And it had a conference table in it. And as I walk in the room, he's sitting there at the end of the table in the big padded chair. He's got a big cigar. He puts his feet up on the table. He says, James, I wonder what the poor people are doing these days.
He was so funny. That it's funny. That was Philadelphia, I think. I was there, and I actually stayed at Dennis's house the night before. It was me, Dennis, Don Leibel, and Mark who rode over to the show that morning. We would get to the hotel, and we pull up to the hotel, and no one's really there yet. So I asked the bellboy or bellman, whatever he is. I say, "Is anyone here yet from the wrestling?" And he goes, "Yeah, the champ is here."
Oh no, I know this story.
And I said, "Who's the champ?" And he goes, "The guy who beat Hogan." Like, who? I don't know who you're talking about. We're with the show. Who is that? And he goes, "The wrestling dentist." And I said, "Oh," and it was Lano. Lano got there and told him that he had beaten Hogan and he was the heavyweight champion.
That's when Mike still had his dentist license and he was on too much of the nitrous.
That's right. I heard he lost his license. Bob Barnett told me that.
I'm surprised he's probably still down on his hands and knees looking for it too. But there was a time, Dennis Carluzzo and Amy Lee Murray got in a fight at the Marriott, in front of the Marriott at the airport in Philadelphia. This was in the late 80s when it was the place to be. The Horsemen were there at the bar and everything. And they said, I wasn't there for it because we stayed at the Red Roof Inn because we saved our money. Imagine that. But I heard about it, and apparently Amy Lee got mad. Dennis got mad. They started slap fighting and kicking at each other. Amy Lee broke down to some kind of kung fu stance, tried to use martial arts on him, and they were screaming, "Fuck you, you fucking fuck." I think that's where "fuck you, you fucking fuck" it was first uttered ever. And then Amy Lee said something like, I'll get you. My uncle's a judge. And Dennis said, "Fuck your uncle, Judge." And it was a slobber knocker and a smackdown of epic proportions.
I remember a few years later they got into a fist fight, I believe, in a hotel room at one of the shows. And then they would get into these fights, and then she would still be around somehow.
Yeah,
it was always interesting.
It was a love-hate relationship.
He called me up one night. I'll never forget this. It must have been like 2 a.m. And Dennis, hey brother, which was less copying Hulk Hogan than it was copying Geno Moore, I think. He would call up and say, "Hey,
the Purple Bomber, Geno Moore."
And he goes, "I have a great idea that we're going to do on the next show." I was like, "Okay, what is it, Dennis?" He goes, "I just saw a movie. We're going to have," at that time, he had a team called the Sons of Blitzkrieg, I believe. They were like Nazi sympathizers. He goes, "I'm going to have the Nazis feud with a Vietnamese team." And I said, "Dennis, who's the baby face? Like, who are the fans supposed to cheer?" He's like, "I haven't thought that far out yet." But he saw some movie and he called me up. And Dennis was, you hear a lot of people say, "Oh, he was this and that." But if you knew Dennis and you were around Dennis, he was the funniest human being on the planet.
Oh, yes, and nobody I'd rather work for, and always took care of me. No matter, if the house was bad, I'd take less from him. If the house was good, he'd give more to me. The shows were fun, most of the time. And it was just, it was Dennis. His charm was timeless.
And he gave young people who were interested that he could see that they were interested. He gave them opportunities in the business. He gave me a chance to do things.
Well, yeah, but I mean, going back to Ace Darling and Devin Storm and those guys, he was a big proponent of Reckless Youth who had a pretty good career back in the 90s. And some of the younger guys that ended up of Simon Diamond, Lance Diamond, that ended up going places in ECW later on, et cetera, et cetera. He's a guy that, that started a lot of them and gave them, chances to be Candido.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Dennis was one of the early, also successful independent promoters in the Northeast. I mean, when he would run shows that would draw 700, 100, 800, 1,000 people at some of these high schools, it was not. It wasn't normal then. It ain't normal now.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I remember one of his shows. It may have been that one in Philly, or it may have been a different one because I think it was the NWA 50th anniversary show that I'm thinking of. And, it was a night, I think we all know now Steve Regal had problems for a while.
Well, yeah, Regal and Severn, right?
It was either Regal and Severn or Regal and Dory Funk. I think it was Regal and Dory.
Whichever one it was, Steve's problems manifested and Jim Ross was there to witness it.
Yeah, I think he put his boots on the wrong feet, but he got in the ring, and the match was very, very bad. And I was in the back of the room. I was right next to Jim having a conversation with Doug Gilbert, and I remember you just turned, you go, "Oh my God, Brian, you're smart. Come here." You said, "Go right now to the ring and you tell the ring announcer that in 1 minute, he should announce that 5 minutes have gone by. And then he should count 2 more minutes and then announce 10 minutes have gone by."
Yes. Yes.
And that was and then that same night, I remember Ray Odyssey.
And they ended up going by the ring announcer's count, at least they ended up going like 48 fucking minutes. We couldn't get him to stop.
That same night, Ray Odyssey landed on his head or something, and he got dragged out. And everyone's trying to help him and see what's wrong. And Missy Hyatt made a beeline over there and pushed everyone out of the way and said, "I'm a paramedic, or I'm going to nursing school." And I swear to God, it looked like she checked him for a hernia. I don't know what she was doing over there. But yeah, Bix,
she kept telling him cough, cough. I don't know what in the world.
Yeah, but one of these days, Bix, we have to do a show about Dennis because I want to make sure that people remember him. And, I know Dave Prazak was recently on your Between the Sheets show, and he said the same thing. Dennis gave people who were interested in the business a chance. Because of Dennis, I got to do commentary on shows. I got to do commentary with Nick Bockwinkel. That was a big deal to me. And Dennis was a great guy, and more stories to come about Dennis Carluzzo in the weeks to come.
Yeah. Prazak didn't like my comparison.
You should have like a Dennis of the week.
That's a great idea. Yeah. I put on Twitter not too long ago his old business card, Dennis Carluzzo, the wrestling czar.
Yes, I've got one of those on my shelf over here. Yeah, with the hammer and sickle, wrestling czar.
From the Carluzzo building. Yeah.
Yeah.
Prazak didn't like my comparison, though, where I said that Dennis was like a twisted version of Paul Bosch in terms of helping people out.
I
don't know.
He had better looking ears, we'll say that. But, it's not that I'm not enjoying just spending my life with you folks, but the better half is waiting to have dinner over here, but you've ribbed me because you've had me staring at some kind of thing on YouTube.
Yeah, let's do this.
All right. Well,
and then we'll do our lightning round.
I'm not supposed to hit play on this until you tell me to, but now I don't know what the fuck it is, and the caption is in Spanish, so that doesn't give me much to go.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a quick lightning round with you. And at the end of it, we're going to play that video. We'll tell you what it is.
Okay.
We're going to really quickly go over a few things that we've talked about in the previous 3 episodes of the show. And we just want to get your take on it. And
I was going to say, is this some kind of test, memory test? Bill Apter did that to me a couple months ago, that memory test where you repeat certain things, and he can go like through 14 different phrases of the sixth sick sheiks, the sixth sheep sick, and all that other stuff, and I can't remember shit. So is this a quiz?
Bill Apter, all these years later, he still looks like Paul Simon's crazy brother. No, we're just going to ask you, just your thoughts on things. Real quick. Ole Anderson, Hall of Famer?
Yes, definitely.
JYD, Hall of Famer?
Yes.
Bruno Sammartino, Killer Kowalski, Freddie Miller. Who else wore a wig?
Oh, fuck. In his very first pro match, Marty Lundy, a.k.a. Arn Anderson.
Really?
Yes, because Arn was thinning even when he was young, and the story we've heard, he broke in up there in North Georgia with Tony Zane and those guys, and I think he was having a match with Tony Zane, maybe his first, whatever. He had a wig on, and they said part of it came loose, and it just began flopping over in front of his face, and that's when he gave up the idea of working with a wig on. But Marty Lundy.
The TBS wrestling theme song, the theme song for all the years you were on World Championship Wrestling.
I have no idea what that is.
Well, it's also the theme to our show. I was going to see if you knew the name of the composer and the name of the song.
I didn't know that anybody had ever admitted to being the composer, and that I didn't know the song had a name. Please tell me.
Bix?
Oh, I thought you had it in front of you.
Oh, I did. I thought I was going to give you a chance.
I forgot.
Hey, how do you keep an idiot in suspense? I'll tell you tomorrow. Is that what you're doing?
Exactly. It's Dynamics by Richard Harvey.
Dynamics by old Dick Harvey. I never did that.
And was also on NFL Films and stuff like that.
I would have never known that.
Last one for the lightning round before we play this video was, how do I put this? Was the
fucking story, you tell it. I don't know.
Was the 1972 Atlanta Wrestling War completely unfair to Ann Gunkel?
Was it? Well, what they did to her beforehand was actually the wrestling war was a product of a product of the unfairness to Ann Gunkel, but it wasn't. The war itself actually wasn't unfair. They jobbed her out of her husband's piece of the company. They were willing to buy it from her, according to what I've heard, but they didn't want her being involved, whereas she didn't want to sell. She wanted to call some shots. Now, I'm sure, especially back in the early 70s, in the left-wing liberal haven of pro wrestling in Atlanta, Georgia, they probably didn't want a woman coming in the office trying to call shots. But the fact that her husband was so popular with the boys that she was able to get literally the entire roster to come over to her promotion indicates that the boys were not real happy to fucking begin with. So, and she got a time slot from Ted Turner. Wonder why. She existed for 2 years against one of the biggest NWA offices, and finally it took the NWA talking Jim Barnett into coming back from Australia to buy into the promotion to settle the war and straighten it out. And I'm pretty sure she got some money to go away. So I don't know if it was really unfair to her, but what they tried to do to her to begin with, just shutting the company down and opening up a new one, fuck you, that was unfair. That was not going to stand.
Fair to say she's a doppelganger for Dixie Carter?
Oh my God, Dixie Carter is basically an Ann Gunkel wannabe, because at least Ann Gunkel ran a major American city regularly for 2 years and drew big crowds. That's more than Dixie has accomplished yet. If Ann Gunkel had $60 million for her father's money to spend, I would probably wager you at that point that we would all be now talking about Miss Ann McMahon, because money went a lot longer way in those days.
Yeah, world champion Jim Wilson.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think the NWA really killed his dog, like he claimed?
Oh fuck! I'm reading this shit. I saw a couple of his TV matches. When he was actually wrestling, and when on family vacation, and I think they showed one on a Goulas tape one time when they had Earl Maynard came from Georgia or whatever the fuck. The point is, he was a big clumsy fucking putz, and I can see why they pushed him locally in Atlanta, because he was a college football star. But the idea that in those days that anybody from the NWA of any importance would have ever even told him that he was going to be a main event guy in another territory, much less a world champion, it's fucking ludicrous. Now, maybe the local Atlanta promoter said, "Oh, kid, you're great. I'll make you the world champion." But if he believed that and couldn't look in the mirror, and especially in a talent-filled territory, compare himself to other people that were national stars and did work all over the country and were pushed, he's a fucking complete fucking idiot.
Yeah. And for those who've never seen him wrestle, because I think it's just the IWA stuff that exists on videotape. He was one of those like a lot of people who just didn't make it, had that kind of flopping over like a dead fish type of selling. He was one of them.
I mean, he was only in the business for a couple of years. They pushed him because he was a big-time college football star in Georgia. That's the only reason he even got in the business to begin with. They wanted to make, and that had worked in different places in the past, and it just didn't work there. And and it was natural that he would team up with Thunderbolt Patterson, because every time they used Thunderbolt in Atlanta, he loved them. And every time they didn't have a spot for him, it was because he was black. And every time he was a champion, it was because he drew a lot of money, which he did in various places. And every time he had to do a job, it was because he was black. And then he'd sue him. And then he would sue him until somebody wanted to give him a spot, and then he'd make up and then he'd run until they didn't have a spot for him, and then he'd sue him again. So Jim Wilson was just waiting around for somebody to make him world champion, because he didn't have a mirror in his house.
Jim, how much do you hate the Midnight Express knockoff song that I'm going to assume Jim Crockett commissioned because he didn't want to pay Giorgio Moroder?
No, that Jim Crockett didn't commission it. He didn't give a fuck. They just played it and didn't pay nobody. But TBS commissioned it, and yes, I hated it. I remember being in hotel rooms on the road when I found out about it, even telling them, "Look, if you will tell me who to address and who to discuss and who to talk to, I'll even try to see about buying our music, because it's a fucking 10-year-old disco song. It's not going to be like licensing Led Zeppelin. Just help me out." "No, we don't want to set that precedent." I said, "What precedent? Me paying for it? You fucking morons." So what they did, they made the knockoff song sound like a porn movie soundtrack. And what I would do is, back then, even the TV trucks were still using cassette tapes. So I would put the real music on a cassette tape and go in the truck and engage in idle conversation with one of the crew guys and switch fucking tapes. And they'd play it for weeks and then somebody go, "Oh shit, we got the right," and they'd switch it back. And then I'd go in and switch it again. So in that era, sometimes you'd hear one, sometimes you'd hear the other, before they finally, got pretty guarded about that. In the last year or so, it was all the rip-off version.
Okay, now, we sent you a link.
Yes.
The link we have sent you is something we've talked about in the previous several episodes. It is, in every episode, we're obsessed with it. And we're obsessed with turning other people onto this and the mystery behind it. So, there's this Argentinian wrestling promotion I'm sure you're aware of, Titanes en el Ring. Lots of gimmicks, lots of weird characters. They had a character...
La Momia.
Me. They had a character named El Pibe Diaz, which from the best work that we've been able to do, we think translates to the Kid 10. And The first version of him comes out in pink overalls with a gang of what seem to be coked up rats from a nightclub. And they all just dance to their own thing, not all together. And he dances with them, beats his opponent, and then he dances with them some more, and then dances with the referee and dances with his opponent. Then they get rid of him and replace him with a second guy. And this certainly does seem more kid-like. He comes out with a group of kids. They all wear Martian antennas, and they dance together, and then he wrestles. That's what you're about to watch, and I'd love it if you could tell us what you're seeing as you see it.
Okay, I will now press play on the magic Wayback Machine for the clip from Titanes en el Ring.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Cornette is watching LP.
And here's the guy and the kids are coming in. He's got antenna on. He's got his legs spread on the ropes as he's holding the ropes open for the children. And now he does a high kick. And then now it's a match with a guy with a saber or a sword. My heavens, this is loud. Wait a minute. Ring announcer is announcing someone. There's a heavy, large wrestler with a sword. And
we have found that is a phony Pirata Morgan.
Oh, wait, and here comes the El Pibe. He does a split. He's dancing. He's kicking. He jumps over he's very athletic. And here more kids come in.
I like how you got that little. I could hear the gleam in your eye. Like you're like that. If I was, if I was still developmental, they should hire this guy.
Well, he's doing some high scissor kicks. He's doing some disco dancing. He's got the touch your toes, the splits. He's still got Martian antenna on. He hasn't done the moonwalk yet, but he's an acrobatic little shit. Yeah, he's just kicking and dancing and jumping up in the air and looks like Denny Terrio on Dance Feet. He's break dancing, folks. There's the break dancing going on here. The little kids are hopping around behind him. Now he spreads open the ropes and the little kids depart. The referee is a giant William Conrad and Cannon lookalike. Okay. He jumps over the big wrestler. He drop kicks the big wrestler. And there's a head scissors, very sloppily executed. And now he kicks the guy in the back. The guy goes over the top rope to the floor. Looks like our boy's going to do a dive. And he does a dive. And he caught his feet on the top rope. Went head first to the floor. The wrestler is trying to pick him up. He's completely unconscious. The kids are dumbstruck. There's the screams of small children. They're going wide now, folks. It's a wide shot. There possibly may be a pool of blood on them, and they're carrying this motherfucker out like a dead fish. The opponent and the children are carrying out the man who was just dancing so effortlessly just moments before, to the shock and amazement of the crowd here. And why did they show that on television? He just dove over the top rope and landed headfirst on the concrete and was like a dish rag.
Well, it's not. To me, it's not that he blows the spot and lands on his head. It's that the other guy immediately yanks him up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he's yanking him. He's trying to pull him up to his feet, and this guy is...
It's the only time...
It's like trying to push a raw oyster in a coin slot.
It's the only time...
Bam! Oh, my God. And the people just go, fuck. And yeah, he's jerking this guy up. He probably has a fucking fractured neck and a spinal injury, and this fucking guy's jerking him to his feet.
And then he picks him up, and the referee, the opponent, and all the children run, carrying his body out of the building.
Yes, the children are carrying him. The big fat guy that he dove on is just staggering around.
What a great job he did trying to catch that dive, too. He just haplessly sticks his arms out.
That's very good. I wish this was a video show, folks, that you could have seen. How do the folks find that on YouTube?
It's we've linked it every time, I think.
We've linked it every time, and now actually we have a playlist being created for each episode by Alan Blackstock. Alan Blackstock, known as Cheap Shot on
Blackstock? Okay, that sounds like a fucking phony name. What is he in the Federal Witness Protection Program?
Well, anyway, it'll be easy for other people to see, but I think that's a good way to end today's program. Once again, I want to say you can go to jimcornette.com to purchase his latest book, Tuesday Night at the Gardens, and also check out his really great DVD series, Back to the Territories, that Kayfabe Commentaries puts out. I know Kayfabe Commentaries have done more to promote the evolution of shoot interviews than anyone else, because they were really stagnant for a while, and they do a really great job. Good production, fun shows.
The graphics are good. They're fun, and plus they built me a set. They went the extra mile on Back to the Territories. I've got a set, and we do B-roll not only from my extensive memorabilia collection about whatever territory, with rare programs and things, sometimes footage, but also Florida with Kevin Sullivan. We used Pete Lederberg's classic Florida photo collection. Bob Leonard from Stampede Wrestling and the Stampede Wrestling edition with Lance Storm, the classic Stampede photographs. So it's a cool docu-shoot series that we do with Kayfabe Commentaries, and that's that's my video series. My audio home, of course, is the Jim Cornette Experience. My website is jimcornette.com. You can pick me up literally, folks, on the fillings in your teeth. I'm everywhere.
On Twitter, he is at the Jim Cornette. And speaking of
I forgot about that one.
Bix, what do you got to plug this week?
I don't know. Let's see. Of course, on Twitter, I am at David Bix. Just usual stuff. Figure 4 Weekly. This week followed up more on the Hogan stuff. New Fighting Spirit.
Boy, don't sell it too hard now, Bix.
Well, I've got a zillion things, so I can't sell each one too hard.
It's all right. It'll be out there.
New Fighting Spirit, I think, is next week. I'm not sure if it's next week or the week after. It has my article about Nick Bockwinkel, where I talked to Baron von Raschke and Larry Hennig and Larry Zbyszko. What else? If you buy anything at MassRepublicsLuchaShop.com, use coupon code BIX for 10% off. What you love that?
I've heard you should have a mask when you do these programs, just in case.
I'm trying to figure out if I should keep going just so Jim can read them all, or
plug Between the Sheets, because that is one of my favorite
Between the
podcasts.
Sheets. This week we had all of our mutual friend to all three of us, Pete Lederberg, was on with me and Chris to go over this week in 1988, including Super Clash 3, the disaster that was, as well as the disaster that was the arrival of Jim Herd in WCW.
Oh, Jesus.
Yes. I was wondering how you'd react to that. And that's on Place to Be Nation's. I'll link that all on my Twitter and in the whatever. And I'll link everything else as far as Amazon, Patreon, PayPal, whatever. If you're in a giving mood. But I guess that's it. And
fuck! Remind me never to hire you as a defense attorney. Yeah, if you feel like looking at my shit, go ahead and do it. It's not really that important. Fuck.
Well,
follow Bix, people, and listen to his shit. And this is a wonderful podcast. You should listen to this, too, right after you listen to me, but not before.
Yes, and I guess that's it. Follow Brian on Twitter at Great Brian Last.
The Great Brian Last. That's right. You've had a gimmick. You were an obnoxious little child when I met you, and you're still a fucking prick. I just like to say that.
Thank you very little.
You're welcome even less. He's got the fucking lines. We don't even have to fucking rehearse. It's great.
But anyway, that's it for this week. We'll be back again next week, every Thursday. As of now, until anything changes, we'll be putting up another episode. So for James from Kentucky and David Bix, tally ho! We'll see you next week.
Oh, Jesus.